When Daniel Mercer inherited Blackthorn Manor from his estranged great-uncle, he saw it as a stroke of luck. Burdened by debt and recently evicted from his apartment in the city, the crumbling estate in rural Vermont seemed like a godsend, free shelter, far from prying eyes. The locals, however, avoided even mentioning the place. When Daniel asked about it at the general store, the clerk's face paled, and he muttered something about bad air before turning away. Undeterred, Daniel arrived at the manor on a fog-drenched October morning. Ivy choked the stone walls, and the front door groaned like a dying animal as it swung open. Inside, dust hung thick in the stale air, and the floorboards creaked with every step, as if warning him to leave. But Daniel was desperate. He ignored the chill that clung to his skin despite the mild autumn weather and began unpacking his few belongings. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, he heard faint scratching inside the walls, like fingernails dragging across wood. He told himself it was rats. But deep down, something ancient and hungry had already noticed his presence. The first week passed in uneasy silence. Daniel tried to convince himself the house was just old, its groans and sighs merely the natural settling of timber and stone. He spent his days patching broken windows, sweeping decades of grime from the floors, and attempting to restore electricity. But the wiring resisted all logic. Fuses blew the moment he flipped a switch, and light bulbs shattered without cause. At night, the temperature would plummet inexplicably, his breath forming clouds even under layers of blankets. Then came the stains. Deep crimson blotches appeared on the hallway wallpaper, fresh, wet, and unmistakably blood-like. He scrubbed them furiously, but they returned by dawn, spreading like mold. One evening, while cooking canned soup over a camping stove, he caught a reflection in the blackened windowpane. A gaunt figure standing behind him, its hollow eyes fixed on his neck. He spun around, nothing there. His heart hammered as he realized the figure hadn't been wearing clothes or skin. That night, he dreamt of roots burrowing into his veins, drinking him dry from the inside out. He woke up gasping, his sheets soaked not in sweat, but in blood. Terrified but unwilling to abandon his only refuge, Daniel visited the town's tiny library, hoping to uncover the manor's history. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, hesitated before handing him a brittle newspaper clipping from 1923. It detailed the gruesome murder of the Blackthorn family, parents and 3 children, found drained of blood in their beds, throats slit but no blood at the scene. The killer was never caught. Locals whispered the house itself had turned on them, punishing the family for some unspeakable sin. Further research revealed that every occupant since then had either vanished or died under mysterious circumstances. One entry mentioned a drifter in the 1970s who was found mummified in the basement, his body desiccated as if centuries old. That night, Daniel barricaded his bedroom door with a heavy dresser. Still, he heard slow, wet footsteps pacing outside. A low, guttural voice murmured through the keyhole, "You're home now." He didn't sleep. At sunrise, he discovered deep scratches on the door, claw marks, far too large to be human. The dresser had been pushed aside as if it weighed nothing, and on his pillow lay a single rust-colored hair, thick, coarse, and definitely not his own. Daniel tried to leave. He packed his bag at dawn, heart pounding with relief. But when he reached the driveway, his car wouldn't start. Engine dead, battery drained though it was new. He walked toward the road, but the forest paths twisted back on themselves, leading him in circles until he stood once more before the manor's iron gates. The house seemed to smirk, its windows glinting like hungry eyes. Defeated, he re-entered. That afternoon, while exploring the basement, a place he'd avoided until now, he found strange symbols carved into the foundation stones. They pulsed faintly, glowing a sickly red. In the center of the room lay a shallow pit filled with dark, viscous liquid that smelled of copper and decay. As he leaned closer, the liquid rippled, forming words, "Feed me." Suddenly, the lights went out. Something cold and slick brushed his ankle. He stumbled back, tripping over debris, and cut his palm on a jagged pipe. A single drop of blood fell into the pit. The liquid hissed, bubbling violently, and the walls trembled as if the house had taken a deep, satisfied breath. From the shadows, skeletal hands emerged, reaching, not to harm him, but to pull him toward the pit. He fled, slamming the basement door shut, but he could still hear the wet, eager slurping from below. Days blurred into a nightmare routine. Daniel stopped eating, surviving on bottled water and sheer willpower. Food spoiled within hours. Meat turned black, bread grew crimson mold. Mirrors showed his reflection aging rapidly. Sunken eyes, gray skin, lips cracked and bleeding. The house fed on his fear, growing stronger with every passing hour. Whispers followed him everywhere, voices of past victims begging him to join them. "It's easier if you stop fighting," one sighed from the closet. "Just let it drink," another gurgled from the bathtub drain. One night, he awoke to find his arms covered in thin, vein-like cracks oozing blood. The wounds didn't hurt. They itched with unnatural warmth, as if something beneath his skin was stirring. He bandaged them, but the blood seeped through, dripping onto the floorboards, which drank it instantly, leaving no trace. Panic set in. He tried burning the house down, dousing curtains in gasoline, but the flames died the moment they touched the wood, as if smothered by invisible hands. Exhausted, he collapsed in the foyer, sobbing. The front door creaked open on its own, inviting him to flee, but he knew it was a trap. The house wanted him to run so it could chase him, so it could play. Desperate for help, Daniel used his last phone battery to call 911. The dispatcher sounded bored until he described the blood-drinking walls. Then her tone shifted, cold, urgent. "Get out now," she whispered. "That house. It's not on any map anymore." The line went dead. Minutes later, police sirens wailed in the distance, but they never arrived. Instead, the house groaned louder, its timbers twisting like bones resetting. Doors slammed shut throughout the halls, locking him inside. The air grew thick with the stench of iron and rot. From the ceiling, droplets of blood began to fall. Not from pipes, but from the plaster itself, as if the walls were sweating gore. Daniel ran to the attic, the only place he hadn't explored. There, beneath dusty sheets, he found journals belonging to previous owners. Each entry ended the same way. "It's learning my taste." The final journal belonged to his great-uncle. The last page read, "I offered strangers first, then animals. Now it wants me. God forgive me. I gave it my son." Daniel dropped the book, horrified. Outside, thunder cracked. The attic window shattered inward, and a gust of wind carried a child's laughter, high-pitched, cruel, and familiar. It was the laugh of his cousin, who'd vanished here 20 years ago. Desperate for help, Daniel used his last phone battery to call 911. The dispatcher sounded bored until he described the blood-drinking walls. Then her tone shifted, cold, urgent. "Get out now," she whispered. "That house. It's not on any map anymore." The line went dead. Minutes later, police sirens wailed in the distance, but they never arrived. Instead, the house groaned louder, its timbers twisting like bones resetting. Doors slammed shut throughout the halls, locking him inside. The air grew thick with the stench of iron and rot. From the ceiling, droplets of blood began to fall. Not from pipes, but from the plaster itself, as if the walls were sweating gore. Daniel ran to the attic, the only place he hadn't explored. There, beneath dusty sheets, he found journals belonging to previous owners. Each entry ended the same way. "It's learning my taste." The final journal belonged to his great-uncle. The last page read, "I offered strangers first, then animals. Now it wants me. God forgive me. I gave it my son." Daniel dropped the book, horrified. Outside, thunder cracked. The attic window shattered inward, and a gust of wind carried a child's laughter, high-pitched, cruel, and familiar. It was the laugh of his cousin, who'd vanished here 20 years ago. The laughter echoed through the rafters, drawing Daniel deeper into the attic. Cobwebs clung to his face like burial shrouds. In the corner, he found a small altar made of human bones, arranged in a spiral around a blackened bowl. Inside the bowl lay a lock of his cousin's hair, tied with a red ribbon, the same one his aunt used to braid into the boy's curls. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath him gave way. He crashed into the hallway below, breaking his arm. Pain exploded, but worse was the sound. A wet, gulping noise rising from the walls, growing louder as his blood pooled on the floor. The house was feeding. He dragged himself toward the kitchen, hoping to cauterize the wound with the camping stove. But the stove was gone. In its place stood a figure, tall, emaciated. Its skin stretched taut over protruding bones, eyes two empty pits leaking black fluid. It smiled, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "Welcome home, Daniel," it rasped in his great uncle's voice. Behind it, more figures emerged from the shadows, ghosts of past victims, their bodies translucent but mouths stained crimson. They didn't attack. They watched, waiting for the house to finish its meal. Daniel crawled backward, clutching his broken arm, blood smearing the floor. The ghosts parted as the house itself seemed to lean forward, walls contracting like ribs around a beating heart. The air grew heavier, pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. His vision blurred, but he saw the floorboards ripple, opening like hungry jaws beneath him. Roots, black, thorny, and pulsing, snaked out, wrapping around his legs, his waist, his throat. They didn't pierce his skin. They sank into it, merging with his flesh as if he were becoming part of the house. Memories flooded his mind. His great-uncle's guilt, his cousin's terror, the screams of countless others. He understood now, the house wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was the ghost, a sentient entity born from centuries of bloodshed, bound to the land, feeding on life to sustain its existence. And it had chosen him as its next vessel. His blood wasn't just food. It was the key to binding his soul to its foundation. As the roots plunged deeper, he felt his heartbeat sink with the house's groans. His thoughts grew sluggish, replaced by a primal hunger for blood, for more guests. The last thing he saw before his eyes clouded over was his own hand, now gray and veined with black, reaching out to unlock the front door for the next unsuspecting traveler. Weeks later, a young couple seeking shelter from a storm knocked on Blackthorn Manor's door. It swung open silently, revealing a tidy foyer lit by warm lamplight. A man with kind eyes and a bandaged arm greeted them, offering dry clothes and hot tea. "Terrible night," he said with a gentle smile. "Please stay as long as you need." They thanked him, unaware that the wallpaper behind him pulsed faintly with each beat of their hearts. Unseen, the floorboards drank the rainwater dripping from their coats. In the kitchen, the teapot whistled, a sound like a scream stifled by stone. Upstairs, shadows gathered in the corners, watching, waiting. The man's smile never reached his eyes, which held the depthless void of a well that had swallowed too many souls. As the couple settled in, he retreated to the basement, where the pit now glowed brighter than ever. He knelt, whispering to the roots, "Two more, fresh, afraid." The house sighed in pleasure, its hunger momentarily sated, but already dreaming of the next feast. Outside, the storm raged on, masking the soft, wet sound of the front door locking itself behind them. Blackthorn Manor stands to this day, hidden deep in the Vermont woods, its address erased from records, its existence denied by maps. Travelers who stumble upon it speak of an inexplicable pull, a whisper in the wind urging them to rest, to enter, to stay. Some return, pale and hollow-eyed, babbling about the kind man and vanishing mid-sentence. Most never come back at all. The house grows stronger with every soul it consumes, its walls thickening with layers of absorbed lives, its foundations rooted in sorrow and slaughter. Locals leave offerings at the edge of the woods, dead rabbits, jars of blood, old photographs, hoping to appease it. But the hunger is endless. And Daniel? He is no longer Daniel. He is the caretaker, the lure, the voice that says welcome while the walls salivate. His memories flicker like dying embers, buried under centuries of the house's will. Sometimes, on moonless nights, if you press your ear to the front door, you can hear it, the slow, rhythmic drip of blood being siphoned from a sleeping guest, and the house's contented sigh as it drinks. It is always thirsty. It is always waiting. When Claire and Marcus moved into Holloway House, a grand Victorian mansion sold far below market value, they thought they'd struck gold. The realtor had been evasive about its history, muttering only that the last family left in a hurry. But with twin toddlers and mounting bills, they couldn't afford to be picky. The house was spacious, sunlit, and strangely quiet. No birds sang near its eaves. No wind rustled its overgrown garden. The only room that unsettled Claire was the nursery on the 3rd floor. Locked, dusty, yet immaculately preserved, as if waiting for a child who never came home. Against Marcus's advice, she cleaned it herself, humming lullabies to ease her nerves. That night, their twins woke screaming at exactly 3:07 a.m., the same time stamped on a faded photograph she'd found beneath the crib. A blurred image of a little girl in a white nightgown, standing alone in the empty nursery, eyes wide with terror. Claire told herself it was coincidence. But when she checked the baby monitor, she saw something move in the corner of the nursery, though no one was there, just shadows shifting. The disturbances began subtly. Toys would appear outside the nursery door, wind-up soldiers, porcelain dolls with chipped faces, though the twins were too young to play with them. One morning, Claire found muddy footprints leading from the nursery to the twins' room, tiny and barefoot. She scrubbed them away, heart pounding. That afternoon, while folding laundry, she heard soft giggling from upstairs. Assuming the twins had wandered off, she rushed up, only to find them napping peacefully in their cribs. The nursery door, however, stood ajar. Inside, the rocking chair swayed gently, though no breeze stirred the air. On the seat lay a single strand of wet, black hair. That night, Claire installed a camera in the nursery. On playback, she watched in horror as the shadows in the corner thickened, stretched, and formed the silhouette of a small girl. The figure crawled toward the crib, reached inside, and pulled out an invisible blanket, tucking it around nothing. Then she turned to the camera and smiled with too many teeth. Claire showed Marcus the footage, but he dismissed it as a glitch or her exhaustion. "Old houses creak," he said. "Your mind fills in the gaps." But Claire knew better. The next day, she visited the town archives. Buried in yellowed newspapers, she uncovered the truth. In 1952, Eleanor Holloway, age 6, vanished from this very nursery. Her parents claimed she was taken by the shadow under the bed. Police found no evidence, but neighbors reported hearing a child's laughter long after the family moved out. Worse, Eleanor wasn't the first. 3 children had disappeared from that room between 1890 and 1952, all under similar circumstances. Each time, the house stood empty for years before new owners arrived, and vanished too. That evening, Claire barricaded the nursery door with a heavy bookshelf. But at 3:07 a.m., the twins screamed again. On the baby monitor, she saw the bookshelf slide aside by unseen hands. The door opened, and from the darkness, a small voice whispered, "I want to play with your babies." Terrified, Claire snatched the twins and fled to the master bedroom, locking the door behind her. Marcus finally believed her when he saw claw marks raking down the nursery door. Deep, jagged, and fresh. They called the police, but the dispatcher sounded confused. "Holloway House? That place burned down in '53, she said. Stunned, they checked property records online. The house was listed as destroyed, yet here they stood inside it. That night, the walls began to bleed. Not water, not paint, but thick, warm blood oozing from cracks in the nursery ceiling, dripping onto the floor in rhythmic pulses. The smell of copper filled the air. Claire held her children close as whispers slithered through the vents. "Let me hold them, just for a minute." At dawn, Marcus tried to break a window to escape, but the glass wouldn't shatter. It absorbed his hammer blows like flesh. From the nursery, the sound of a music box started playing. a haunting lullaby Claire recognized from her own childhood nightmares. The twins, usually cheerful, now stared blankly at the ceiling, murmuring, "She's coming." The house was alive and hungry. Doors led nowhere. Hallways looped back on themselves. The nursery door reappeared in every room, always slightly open, always whispering. Claire stopped sleeping, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. She noticed the twins changing. Their eyes grew darker, their skin paler. They refused solid food, drinking only water, and sometimes, when she wasn't looking, licking droplets of blood from the walls. One afternoon, she found them sitting cross-legged in front of the nursery, staring at the door. "She says we'll be sisters soon," her daughter whispered. Claire dragged them away, but that night, both children sleepwalked to the nursery. She caught them just in time, their small hands reaching for the doorknob. Behind them, the wallpaper peeled back to reveal dozens of tiny handprints. Some old, some fresh, all stained red. The house wasn't just haunted. It was collecting children, weaving their souls into its walls like tapestry threads. And her twins were next. Desperate, Claire searched the attic for answers. Beneath rotting floorboards, she found a hidden journal belonging to Eleanor's mother. The entries grew increasingly frantic. "It watches from the corners. It mimics my voice to call her. Last night, it wore her face." The final page was scrawled in shaky handwriting. "The house wants a child to love. If you don't give it one, it takes them all." Claire's blood ran cold. That explained why previous families vanished. Refusing to sacrifice one child meant losing every soul under the roof. She looked at her sleeping twins, tears streaming down her face. Could she choose? Should she? That night, the nursery door swung open by itself. From within, Eleanor emerged. Not as a ghost, but as a living girl, pale and smiling, holding two porcelain dolls that looked eerily like Claire's children. "You can stay," she said sweetly. "Just leave one with me." Behind her, shadows writhed, forming the shapes of other children. Dozens, maybe hundreds, reaching out with hollow eyes and silent pleas. Claire refused. She barricaded the entire third floor with furniture, salt, and broken mirrors. Anything folklore suggested might ward off spirits. But the house retaliated. Lights flickered violently. The twins' cries turned guttural, inhuman. Their eyes rolled back, revealing black voids. One morning, Claire found Marcus unconscious in the hallway. His wrists slit, but no blood pooled on the floor. It had been absorbed by the wood. When he woke, he didn't recognize her. He kept whispering, "She's so lonely. She just wants a friend." Claire realized the house was rewriting him, stitching his mind into its fabric. That night, she packed a bag, determined to run. But the front door wouldn't budge. Windows reflected only endless hallways. Even the phone lines played Eleanor's lullaby on loop. Trapped, she returned to the nursery, not to surrender, but to fight. She lit candles, drew protective symbols, and stood between her children and the door. At 3:07 a.m., the walls cracked open, and Eleanor stepped through. Not alone, but leading a procession of spectral children. All holding hands, all smiling with empty eyes. "Give us one," Eleanor said, her voice echoing with the chorus of lost children. "Or we take them both. And you." Claire clutched her twins tighter, tears evaporating in the unnatural heat radiating from the walls. She remembered the journal. It takes them all. There was no winning, only choosing how the loss would happen. In a surge of maternal fury, she lunged. Not at Eleanor, but at the crib. She smashed it with a fire poker, splintering wood, tearing apart the mattress. As stuffing flew, something dark and oily seeped from within. The heart of the nursery, pulsing like a tumor. The children shrieked, their forms flickering. The house groaned in pain. Claire grabbed the burning candle and thrust it into the oozing mass. Flames erupted, black and hungry, consuming the crib, the walls, the very air. Eleanor screamed, her body unraveling into smoke. But as the fire spread, Claire realized it wasn't destroying the house. It was feeding it. The flames turned crimson, and the shadows grew teeth. The fire didn't burn, it transformed. Walls melted into flesh. Floorboards became ribs. The nursery was no longer a room. It was a living throat, swallowing light, sound, hope. Claire's twins vanished from her arms, pulled into the writhing darkness. She screamed their names, but her voice was eaten by the house. Desperate, she ran, not away, but deeper in, following their faint cries. She found them in what was once the nursery closet, now a pulsating cavity lined with tiny bones. Eleanor stood there, reborn, her skin stitched from patches of other children's faces. "They're mine now," she whispered, "but you can join them if you let go." Claire collapsed, sobbing. She had fought, bargained, raged, but love was the house's favorite currency, and she loved them too much to leave them alone in the dark. With trembling hands, she walked forward, kissed each twin's forehead, and whispered, "Be brave." Then she stepped back and closed the closet door from the outside. The house sighed, satisfied. Two more souls woven into its walls. One more mother broken on its altar. Years later, another family tours Holloway House. The realtor mentions nothing of its past, only that it's charming, spacious, and perfect for children. The mother coos over the preserved nursery, untouched since the 1950s. "How quaint," she says, unaware that the rocking chair moves when no one's looking. That night, her son wakes at 3:07 a.m., pointing at the corner. "The lady with too many eyes wants to play," he whispers. Downstairs, the new father hears faint lullabies drifting from the third floor, but no one lives up there. Outside, the moon casts long shadows across the lawn, and in the nursery window, three silhouettes watch. A woman with hollow eyes, and two small children holding hands, smiling with lips stitched shut. The house breathes content. It has everything it needs. Walls full of souls, a cradle always waiting, and an endless line of families walking through its doors, unaware that the nursery is never empty. It's always hungry, always watching, always ready to welcome its next child. Elliot Reed didn't believe in curses until he stepped inside Blackwell Asylum. A freelance photographer hired to document the abandoned psychiatric hospital for an urban exploration blog, Elliot saw it as just another decaying relic of the past. The locals warned him not to go. They called the place the Crawling House and claimed its hallways shifted at night, swallowing trespassers whole. He laughed it off. Armed with a camera, a flashlight, and a backpack of energy bars, he entered through a broken window on a cold October dusk. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of mildew and something sharper: copper, decay, and burnt hair. Dust motes floated like ash in the dim light. His boots echoed on cracked tile, but beneath the sound, he heard something else. A slow, wet dragging, like flesh sliding over concrete. He told himself it was rats, but when he turned a corner, his flashlight beam caught movement. A pale hand, bone-thin, vanishing into a wall. The asylum wasn't empty. It was waiting, and whatever lived inside moved on all fours. Elliot pressed deeper, snapping photos of rusted gurneys, shattered glass, and walls scrawled with frantic messages. They crawl in the walls. Don't sleep. IT eats your dreams. The further he went, the heavier the air became, oppressive, as if the building itself resented his presence. His flashlight flickered. When it steadied, he found himself in a hallway that hadn't been on the asylum's blueprints. Doors lined both sides, each marked with a patient number, all slightly ajar. From behind one, he heard soft weeping. Against his better judgment, he peeked inside. The room was empty except for a single chair facing the wall. On the floor lay a child's shoe, soaked in blood. Suddenly, the chair scraped backward. Elliot stumbled out, heart hammering. Behind him, the door slammed shut. He ran, but the hallway stretched impossibly long, doors multiplying like teeth in a jaw. At the far end, something crouched, hunched, naked, limbs bent backward, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Turned toward him, and began to crawl. Elliot sprinted back the way he came, but the asylum had changed. Staircases led to ceilings. Windows opened onto brick walls. Every turn brought him back to the same blood-stained hallway. His camera battery died. His flashlight dimmed. Panic clawed at his throat. He ducked into an old operating theater, barricading the door with a rusted gurney. In the silence, he heard it. Dozens of wet, slithering sounds converging on his location, scratching at the walls, whimpering from the vents. Then, a voice, soft, broken, almost human, whispered through the keyhole. "Let us in, we're so cold." He covered his ears, but the whispers seeped into his skull. Memories flooded him. Childhood nightmares of things under his bed, of hands grabbing his ankles in the dark. He realized with horror, the asylum wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was infested with patients. Those who never left, twisted by decades of torment into something neither alive nor dead, crawling through the walls like insects, feeding on fear. And now they knew he was here. Hours passed. Elliot's water ran out. His hands shook. He tried calling for help, but his phone showed no signal, and the time froze at 3:07 a.m. He remembered reading about that hour in asylum records. The witching minute when restraints failed and patience vanished. Suddenly, the gurney blocking the door screeched across the floor. The door creaked open. Darkness yawned beyond. From it, a figure emerged. Emaciated, skin peeling like old paint, eyes milky white. Its mouth hung open, revealing blackened gums and no tongue. It crawled forward on all fours, joints popping with every movement. Elliot backed into a corner, fumbling for anything to defend himself. His fingers closed around a rusted scalpel. The creature lunged. He slashed wildly. Black fluid sprayed the walls. The thing shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and retreated into the hallway. But its cry summoned others. Dozens of pale, twitching forms poured from vents, ceiling tiles, even the floor. They surrounded him, sniffing, clicking their teeth, hungry. Elliot knew he couldn't fight them all, so he did the only thing left. He ran straight into the darkness behind them. He burst into a vast, circular chamber, the old hydrotherapy room. Rusted pipes snaked from ceiling to floor, dripping black fluid. In the center stood a stone basin filled with murky water. Reflected in its surface wasn't his face, but a gaunt, hollow-eyed version of himself, smiling. The creatures halted at the doorway, hissing, unwilling to enter. Elliot realized this room was sacred to them, or cursed. He waded into the basin. The water was warm, thick like blood. Visions flooded his mind. Patients strapped to tables, doctors chanting in tongues, walls bleeding as the asylum woke up. The building wasn't just haunted. It was alive, built on a nexus of suffering, fed by madness. The crawling things were its children, its limbs, its hunger made flesh, and it wanted him to join them, to crawl, to forget his name, to become part of the walls. He tried to climb out, but the water clung to him like tar. The reflection reached up and grabbed his wrist. "Stay," it whispered. "You belong here." Outside, the creatures began to chant in unison, a guttural dirge that shook the foundation stones. Elliot fought the pull, screaming as the water dragged him deeper. His lungs burned. Just as darkness took him, he felt hands, real human hands, grabbing his shoulders, hauling him out. Gasping, he collapsed on the floor. A woman stood over him, pale and wide-eyed, wearing a tattered nurse's uniform. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "But I can help you leave if you trust me." She led him through hidden passages, avoiding the crawling things. Her name was Lillian, a nurse who'd worked here in 1978. She tried to expose the experiments, but the asylum swallowed her too. Now she existed between worlds, guiding lost souls out, or in. "The exit is real," she said, "but only if you don't look back." They reached a service tunnel, moonlight glimmering at the end. Hope surged in Elliot's chest. He stepped forward, then heard his own voice behind him, begging, "Don't leave me." He turned. It was his reflection, still in the basin, tears streaming down its face. "I'm you," it sobbed. "And I'm trapped." Lillian's face fell. "Oh no," she whispered. "You looked." The tunnel collapsed behind them. Moonlight vanished. Lillian's form flickered like a dying bulb. "You broke the rule," she said, voice cracking. "Now the house claims you." The walls pulsed. From the darkness, the crawling things emerged, not attacking but bowing. They parted, revealing a new hallway, pristine and endless, lined with doors that bore Elliot's name. "Your room is ready," Lillian whispered, now wearing a patient's gown, her eyes turning milky white. "You'll rest now." He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. They carried him forward, stiff and jerking, like a puppet. Inside his room, everything was familiar. His childhood bed, his favorite books, photos of his family, all slightly wrong. The faces in the photos had no eyes. The book's pages were blank. The bed smelled of rot. He sat on the edge, numb. Outside, the creatures began to sing, a warped lullaby his mother used to hum. Tears streamed down his face. He wasn't escaping. He was being absorbed. The asylum didn't kill its victims, preserved them, forever. Days blurred. Elliot stopped counting time. He ate tasteless gruel delivered by silent orderlies with stitched mouths. He slept, but dreams were worse. Visions of himself crawling through walls, dragging his own spine like a tail, whispering to new arrivals through keyholes. Sometimes, he'd wake to find his fingers fused together, his knees bending backward. The transformation was slow, inevitable. He saw others like him, former explorers, journalists, cops, all now part of the asylum's ecosystem. They cleaned the halls, fed the new ones, sang the lullabies. One night, he passed Lillian in the corridor. She smiled sadly. "It's easier if you stop fighting," she said. "The pain ends when you accept you belong here." He wanted to scream, but his voice had turned to static. That night, he stood before the hydrotherapy basin again. His reflection no longer looked like him, it looked like them. Pale, hollow, hungry. It reached out. This time, Elliot reached back. Their fingers touched, and the basin filled with blood. The next morning, Elliot wore a patient's gown. His skin was paler, his eyes clouded. He joined the others in the main hall, standing in perfect silence as a new victim. A young woman with a camera stumbled through the front doors. She screamed when she saw them. Elliot didn't move, but deep inside, a fragment of his old self wept. He watched as the crawling things surrounded her, gentle at first, then insistent. They led her to the hydrotherapy room. He followed not by choice, but because the walls whispered his name. Inside, she fought, sobbing, begging for mercy. Elliot stood beside the basin, his reflection now grinning. The woman looked at him, recognition dawning. "You were human once," she gasped. He nodded slowly. Then, without thinking, he pushed her in. The water swallowed her scream. The asylum sighed in pleasure. And Elliot felt the last spark of his humanity drown in the black, warm depths. He was home. Blackwell Asylum still stands, hidden in the woods outside Ravenswood. Urban explorers vanish there every year. Locals say if you listen at night, you can hear them. Crawling through the walls, singing lullabies, whispering invitations to lost souls. The building breathes. It dreams. It hungers. And deep within its cursed hallways, Elliot Reed walks. No longer a man, but a guide, a warning, a lure. He waits by the entrance, pale and silent, holding out a rusted camera to anyone who dares step inside. Some take it. Most do. They think they're documenting history. They don't realize they're becoming part of it. The asylum doesn't need locks or guards. It opens its doors willingly, because everyone who enters eventually learns to crawl, and the walls are always hungry for more. Mira Chun didn't believe in ghosts until she inherited Ravenswood Manor. Her great-aunts will stipulated one condition. She had to spend 30 consecutive nights in the house before claiming ownership. Desperate for money after her mother's medical bills, Mira agreed, despite the town's warnings. "No one stays past midnight," the grocer muttered, refusing to meet her eyes. The manor loomed on a hill, its windows like empty sockets, ivy strangling its stone walls. Inside, dust coated everything, yet the dining room table was set for dinner. Crystal glasses filled with dark liquid, silverware polished, plates steaming faintly as if freshly served. Mira laughed nervously. "Someone's playing a joke," she said aloud, but the air grew colder with every word. That first night, she fell asleep in the parlor. She woke at 11:59 p.m. to the sound of chairs scraping across the floor. From the hallway, a chorus of voices whispered, "She's here. The feast begins soon." And then silence. Midnight struck. The chandelier above the dining table flared to life, and the ghosts arrived. They entered not through doors, but through walls, figures in tattered finery, faces pale and hollow, eyes gleaming with unnatural hunger. They took their seats silently, each pulling out a chair with a slow, deliberate scrape. The dark liquid in the glasses swirled, thickening into blood. Steam rose from the plates, revealing charred meat and glistening organs. Mira watched from the doorway, frozen. One ghost, a woman in a moth-eaten gown, turned her head completely backward to stare at Mira. "Guests are welcome," she hissed, but only as the main course. Mira fled upstairs, locking herself in a bedroom. She heard them below. Laughter like breaking glass, the wet sound of feasting, bones cracking between teeth. At 12:30 a.m., it stopped. Silence returned. She dared to peek out and found the dining room spotless. No dishes, no food, only a single drop of blood on the tablecloth, and a note written in ash. "Night 2. Come angry." She realized with dawning horror. The ghosts weren't haunting the house. They were hosting a banquet, and she was the next dish. Mira considered leaving, but the front door wouldn't open. Windows refused to budge. Even her phone showed no signal, the time frozen at 11:58 p.m. every night. She searched the library, finding journals detailing the manor's history. In 1888, Lord Ravenswood hosted a grand dinner for 20 nobles. None were seen again. Locals claimed he'd made a pact with something ancient beneath the house, an entity that demanded blood in exchange for power. The feast never ended. It merely paused, waiting for new guests to replenish its hunger. Each owner since had tried to break the curse, but all failed. Their names appeared in the guest ledger as menu items. On night 3, Mira hid in the attic. At midnight, the ghosts called her name. Not in anger, but in invitation. "Mira, your seat is warm." She felt an invisible pull toward the stairs. Her stomach growled, though she hadn't eaten in days. Worse, she craved the smell rising from below. Roasted flesh, iron, spice. She was beginning to want to join them. By night 5, Myra's reflection looked gaunt. Her eyes shadowed, lips cracked. She avoided mirrors. They showed her seated at the table, carving into her own arm with a silver knife. Food turned to ash in her mouth. Water tasted like blood. The ghosts no longer frightened her. They fascinated her. She watched them nightly from the shadows, noting how they savored every bite, how their forms grew more solid with each feast. On night 7, she found a place setting with her name etched in bone. "They're preparing me," she whispered. That night she didn't hide. She stood in the dining room as the clock neared 12. The chandelier flickered. Walls wept black tears. The ghosts materialized, smiling. The woman in the moth-eaten gown gestured to the empty chair. "Sit, dire. You've waited long enough." Mira stepped forward. Her hand trembled as she lifted the fork. But instead of eating the meat on her plate, she stabbed it into her own thigh. Blood spilled. The ghosts gasped, not in horror but delight. "She offers herself," they cried. "The feast is blessed." From that night on, Mira changed. Her skin grew cold. Her pulse slowed. She no longer slept. She waited. The ghosts treated her as one of their own, teaching her the rituals. How to summon the feast, how to sharpen hunger into art, how to savor fear like fine wine. On night 10, she helped prepare the table. Not with dishes, but with symbols drawn in blood. The entity beneath the house stirred, pleased. Visions flooded her dreams. Centuries of feasts, kings and beggars alike devoured, souls woven into the manor's foundation. She understood now the ghosts weren't trapped. They were elevated. By feeding the entity, they gained immortality, power, purpose. And soon she would join them fully. But first, she needed to invite others. The feast required fresh souls. So on night 12, she walked into town, pale and elegant, and posted flyers. Ravenswood Manor open for tours, free dinner included. The first volunteers arrived that evening, smiling, unaware their names were already carved into bone plates. The newcomers, 3 college students filming a ghost hunt, laughed as they entered. "This place is so extra," one joked, snapping selfies. Mira greeted them warmly, offering wine that smelled faintly of copper. They toasted, unaware the liquid thickened in their throats. At 11:59 p.m., the lights dimmed. The students giggled nervously. Perfect timing for our live stream. But when midnight struck, the chandelier blazed crimson. The ghosts appeared, not as specters, but as beautiful aristocrats. The students' cameras died. Their phones shattered. One tried to run, only to find the front door fused shut. Mira watched calmly as the ghost night 20 arrived. Mira no longer needed to eat human food. She drank moonlight and fear. Her veins pulsed with black ichor. She could walk through walls, summon storms, whisper madness into sleepers' ears. The entity beneath the house called her Daughter of the Feast. She spent her days polishing silverware made from spine bones, arranging centerpieces of wilted roses and human teeth. That night, a storm raged outside. Thunder masked the screams of 2 lost hikers who'd sought shelter. Mira welcomed them with open arms, serving stew that writhed on the spoon. They ate willingly, entranced. At midnight, their souls peeled away like fruit skins, devoured by the ghosts in ecstasy. Afterward, Mira stood alone in the dining room, staring at her reflection in a blood-filled goblet. Smiled back with too many teeth. She realized she missed nothing of her old life. Not sunlight, not warmth, not love. Only the hunger remained, and it was glorious. On night 29, the town sent a priest. Father Callahan, armed with holy water and a trembling faith, demanded Mira leave the house. "It's not too late," he pleaded. "Your soul can still be saved." Mira invited him in for tea. As he sat, the ghosts gathered silently behind him. "You misunderstand," she said gently. "I'm not possessed. I'm chosen." She poured him a cup. He drank and choked as his own memories flooded out. Childhood sins, secret shames, hidden lusts. His soul unraveled before them. The ghosts feasted on his regrets while he sobbed. When it was over, his body collapsed empty. Mira placed his collar on the mantel, a new decoration. That night, she completed the ritual. She cut her wrists over the dining table, letting her blood mingle with the entity's essence. The house shook. Roots of shadow burst through the floor, wrapping around her, fusing her to the foundation. She became the heart of the feast, the eternal hostess, and at midnight, she took her rightful seat at the head of the table, smiling as the chandelier blazed crimson once more. Night 30 dawned, but time no longer mattered. Mira existed outside it, bound to the manor's hunger. The feast never ended. It cycled endlessly, fed by wanderers, fools, and the desperate. She lured them with promises of shelter, wealth, love. They came willingly, always, and always they dined as both guest and meal. The ghosts adored her. The entity sang through the walls. Even the moon seemed to watch with approval. One evening, a young woman arrived, pale, wide-eyed, clutching a suitcase. "I inherited this place," she said. "I have to stay 30 nights. Mira recognized her instantly. Another heir, another sacrifice. She smiled warmly. "Welcome home," she said, leading her to the dining room. "Dinner is almost ready." The girl didn't notice the bone plates, or the blood in the wine, or the way the shadows leaned closer, hungry. She sat down, hopeful, and Mira knew, tonight the feast would be especially sweet. Ravenswood Manor still stands, its gates always open, its lights always on. Travelers vanish there regularly, drawn by whispers of inheritance, shelter, or salvation. None return, but if you pass by at midnight, you might see them. Figures in fine clothes gathered around a glowing table, laughing, feasting, drinking deep. At the head sits a woman with eyes like voids and a smile stitched from starlight and sorrow. She raises her glass to you, and for a moment you feel it, the pull, the promise, the terrible beauty of belonging. The ghosts feast at midnight, and they're always looking for new guests, always hungry, always waiting. Come inside. Dinner is served. In the heart of a remote village, an isolated manor witnesses the mysterious death of a wealthy family one by one. Everyone thinks it's natural fate, but investigator Elias sees a bloody thread linking the victims. Poison hides in the cup, and the killer wears the robe of trust. The one who protects the family might be the one killing them cold-bloodedly. Does anyone dare to uncover the secret of the isolated manor before it's too late? In the heart of a remote English village, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills, stood the isolated Blackwood Manor, a place steeped in history and recent tragedy. For over a year, the aristocratic family residing within its stone walls had been plagued by a series of untimely deaths that baffled the local authorities completely. Each passing seemed natural at first glance, attributed to heart failures or sudden illnesses, yet the frequency was too suspicious to ignore by anyone paying attention. The villagers whispered stories of curses and ancient grudges behind closed doors, fearing that the house itself was cursed by some unseen evil force lurking in the shadows. The manor loomed over the landscape like a silent guardian of dark secrets, its windows dark and unwelcoming to any outsiders who dared to approach the gates. The air around the estate felt heavy with sorrow and unspoken fear, creating an atmosphere of dread that permeated every corner of the property day and night. No one dared to stay overnight except the family members and their essential staff, who lived in constant anxiety about who might be the next victim of this mysterious affliction striking without warning. The local police had given up, labeling it a tragic coincidence, but the surviving family members knew better than to trust in luck anymore. They needed someone who could see beyond the surface of things. Enter Elias Thorne, a private investigator known for his sharp intellect and skepticism regarding supernatural explanations for criminal acts. He was summoned by the eldest surviving daughter, who feared she would be next on the list of casualties within the household. Elias arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening, his car headlights cutting through the mist that clung to the ground like a heavy blanket covering the driveway. He stepped out into the cold air, adjusting his coat against the biting wind that swept across the open fields surrounding the estate. The manor looked even more imposing in person, its Gothic architecture casting long shadows that seemed to reach out towards him as he walked to the door. He was greeted by a nervous butler, who led him into a dimly lit study filled with the scent of old books and polishing wax. Elias listened intently to the family's history, taking notes on every detail provided about the deceased relatives and their final moments. He noticed the tremors in the daughter's hands as she spoke, indicating genuine terror rather than mere grief over the losses. Elias assured her that he would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply buried it might be within the walls of this isolated house. He began his work immediately, sensing that time was not on their side in this dangerous game. The interior of the manor was a maze of corridors and locked rooms, each holding potential clues that had been overlooked by previous investigations conducted poorly. Elias spent his first night walking the halls, listening to the creaking floorboards that sounded like footsteps echoing in the silence of the night. The portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow his movement as he patrolled the quiet spaces alone. He felt a distinct sense of being watched, though no one else was awake to witness his late-night exploration of the property. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of grandfather clocks placed strategically throughout the expansive house. He examined the locks on the doors, finding some that had been tampered with recently without any obvious reason for such interference. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, making him hyper-aware of his surroundings at all times during his inspection. He checked the kitchens and the servants' quarters, looking for any signs of unauthorized access or strange substances hidden away from plain sight. The atmosphere was charged with tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move in this deadly chess match. Elias knew that the killer was likely still inside, watching him just as closely as he was observing the environment. Morning brought a review of the medical reports, which Elias had requested from the local coroner before arriving at the estate grounds. He spread the documents across the large wooden table, searching for inconsistencies in the causes of death listed officially. While each death was certified as natural, there were subtle similarities in the symptoms described by the witnesses present at the time. Dizziness, nausea, and sudden cardiac arrest were common threads weaving through the narratives of the deceased family members. Elias suspected a slow-acting poison that mimicked natural ailments, making it difficult for doctors to detect without specific toxicology screens. He noted the times of death, finding they often occurred after dinner or during late evening hours when the family was relaxed. This pattern suggested that the poison was being administered through food or drink consumed regularly within the manor walls. He decided to investigate the kitchen staff and the supply chains for the household provisions immediately. The complexity of the case grew with every piece of paper he read, revealing a methodical approach by the perpetrator. Elias realized he was dealing with someone knowledgeable about medicine or botany, someone who understood how to hide murder within the guise of illness. Interviews with the remaining family members revealed a web of greed, resentment, and hidden conflicts that spanned generations within the lineage. Each suspect had a potential motive, ranging from inheritance disputes to long-held grudges against the patriarch of the family. The conversations were tense, with accusations flying across the room like daggers aimed at vulnerable hearts. Elias observed their body language carefully, noting who avoided eye contact and who seemed too eager to blame others for the tragedies. The eldest son claimed he was away on business during most deaths, but his alibi lacked solid corroborating evidence from independent sources. The younger sister spoke of hearing strange noises near the medicine cabinet before her uncle passed away suddenly in his sleep. Elias sensed fear beneath their anger, a shared understanding that none of them were truly safe while the killer remained at large within the house. He pressed them on who had access to the private quarters of the victims, narrowing down the list of individuals who could have administered the substance. The dynamics were complicated, with alliances shifting rapidly as the interrogation progressed through the long afternoon session. Elias kept his expression neutral, letting them reveal more than they intended through their nervous explanations. The breakthrough came when Elias explored the extensive greenhouse attached to the side of the manor, filled with rare and exotic plants from around the world. Among the lush greenery, he identified several species known for their toxic properties if extracted and ingested by humans intentionally. The soil around these specific plants showed signs of recent disturbance, indicating someone had been harvesting leaves or roots recently without permission. He recognized the leaves of the belladonna plant, notorious for its use in historical poisonings throughout European history. This discovery confirmed his theory that the deaths were not natural but calculated acts of murder using botanical knowledge. He wondered who in the household possessed such specific knowledge about plants and their effects on the human body system. The gardener was questioned, but he claimed ignorance about the toxic nature of the plants he tended daily. Elias suspected the gardener was lying or being protected by someone higher up in the household hierarchy. He collected samples of the soil and plant matter for further analysis in a private laboratory outside the village. The greenhouse became the central focus of his investigation, holding the key to unlocking the entire mystery surrounding the family deaths. Connecting the dots between the plant life and the medical symptoms, Elias formulated a hypothesis about the method of delivery used by the killer. The poison was likely mixed into tea or wine, substances consumed daily by the victims without suspicion of tampering. He reviewed the serving schedules and noted that one person had access to the beverages before they reached the family members consistently. The pattern pointed towards someone trusted implicitly by the family, someone who moved freely between the kitchen and the dining rooms without question. This realization narrowed the suspects down significantly, eliminating those who did not handle food or drink preparation directly. Elias set a trap, announcing falsely that he had found definitive proof pointing to a specific family member to provoke a reaction. He watched the staff closely during dinner, looking for any signs of nervousness or attempts to interfere with the serving process. The tension in the dining room was palpable, with every clink of silverware sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. He knew the killer would feel cornered and might attempt to flee or destroy evidence before being caught officially. The night was set for a confrontation that would finally bring the truth to light. As night fell, Elias positioned himself in the shadows of the pantry, waiting for the killer to make their move against the bait he had set. He had placed a decanter of wine on the table, claiming it was the favorite of the supposed suspect to lure the perpetrator out. The house was silent, save for the wind howling outside against the thick stone walls of the old manor structure. He heard soft footsteps approaching, careful and deliberate, trying to avoid making any noise on the wooden floorboards. A figure emerged from the darkness, reaching for the decanter with a gloved hand to avoid leaving fingerprints behind. Elias stepped out quietly, blocking the exit before the figure could retreat back into the shadows of the corridor. The figure froze, realizing there was no escape from this carefully planned ambush set by the investigator. It was not a family member, but the live-in physician who had been certifying the deaths as natural all along. The doctor had been using his medical access to administer the poison while covering up the signs during the official examinations. Elias signaled for the local constable waiting outside to enter and secure the scene immediately. The physician did not resist arrest, sinking into a chair with a look of resignation covering his weary and aged face completely. He confessed that he had been manipulated by a distant relative seeking the family fortune through elimination of the direct heirs. The doctor explained how he used his knowledge to mask the symptoms, ensuring the deaths appeared as natural causes to avoid suspicion from authorities. He expressed regret but claimed financial desperation had driven him to collaborate with the mastermind behind the scheme. Elias listened to the confession, documenting every word for the official report that would be filed with the county prosecutors soon. The motive was purely greed, exploiting the trust placed in him by the family over many years of service. The revelation shocked the remaining family members, who had trusted the doctor with their health and lives implicitly. The betrayal cut deep, leaving scars that would take years to heal within the surviving relatives. Elias ensured the doctor was taken away securely, preventing any chance of self-harm or escape before the trial. The house felt lighter somehow, the oppressive atmosphere lifting with the removal of the threat inside. In the days following the arrest, the manor began to return to a state of normalcy, though the scars of the tragedy remained visible. Elias prepared to leave, his work concluded successfully despite the dangers he faced during the investigation process. The family thanked him profusely, offering rewards which he politely declined as part of his professional code of ethics. He walked out into the morning sun, feeling the fresh air fill his lungs after days of breathing the stale air of deception. The isolated manor stood silent once more, no longer a house of death but a home seeking healing from the past. Elias knew that evil could hide in any place, even behind the walls of respected institutions and trusted individuals. He drove away, leaving the village behind, ready for the next case that would inevitably come his way soon. The story of the Blackwood Manor would become a legend in the village, warned to children about trusting strangers too easily. But for Elias, it was just another case closed, another mystery solved through logic and persistence against the odds. The sun rose higher, signaling a new day free from the shadow of the isolated manor's secret. Imagine London in 1888, thick fog choking the breath, and a killer walking among the shadows unseen. As the fog grows, a new crime appears, Inspector Arthur has only one night to solve the puzzle before the killer disappears forever. Will he succeed in catching the shadow before it's too late? Listen now to the story of The Shadow of London Fog. The story began in the winter of 1888, when a thick and dreary fog covered the old streets of London, turning the city into a labyrinth of shadows and terrifying mystery. The gas lamps flickered faintly through the perpetual fog, like pale stars trying to penetrate the pitch darkness that dominated the general atmosphere. In a very narrow alley near the River Thames, an exhausted night watchman found a man's body lying on the cold, damp ground, without the killer leaving any clear trace indicating his true identity. The news spread like wildfire among the residents of the poor district, increasing the state of terror and panic that had been hovering over the city for several weeks. This was not the first body to be discovered under such mysterious circumstances, but it was the most ambiguous and complex until that moment in time. The fog acted as a protective curtain for the unknown killer, allowing him to move freely between poor and rich districts without being seen by any passers-by. People felt that there was a mastermind behind these serial events, someone who knew the city better than the police officers themselves. Rumors began to spread in crowded cafes and daily newspapers, putting immense pressure on the police directorate to find a quick solution before the public lost confidence completely in the authorities' ability to protect them from this hidden danger lurking in every dark corner of the British capital crowded with people. Inspector Arthur, a man with very long experience in the field of complex criminal investigations, was summoned to his office at Scotland Yard to face this new challenge that threatened the reputation of the entire police force. The office was filled with thick cigarette smoke that choked the breath, and Arthur's facial features reflected severe fatigue and exhaustion resulting from long nights spent without adequate sleep. Before him on the old wooden desk, secret official reports describing each crime in precise and tedious detail were accumulating, but he found no clear common thread linking the victims who belonged to completely different and distant social classes. Senior government officials pressured him to accelerate the pace of work and investigation, warning him of the very grave consequences if the killer continued to escape the city's legal grip. Arthur knew well that time was never on his side, and that every passing minute increased the difficulty of the task and complicated matters more and more dangerously. He decided to review all available evidence again, moving away from traditional search methods that had not yielded any tangible or useful results so far. Arthur deeply believed that the solution lay in the very small details that others might overlook, and he was ready to do his utmost to uncover the curtain on this complex puzzle. The city was waiting for him to be a true savior, and he was never ready to disappoint their hopes, despite the great weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders in those cold and dark nights that did not seem to have a near end. Inspector Arthur began drawing a very large map on the gray wall of his office, where he fixed small red pins in the places where the bodies were found during the past months with precision. He noticed a very strange pattern that began to form clearly before his tired eyes, where all the crimes were very closely linked to the days when London witnessed very thick and unusual fog. It was not just a passing coincidence or a random agreement, but there was precise prior planning that depended on the weather condition in a very amazing and suspicious way. Arthur began reviewing old meteorological records with extreme care and compared them to the times of discovering the bodies accurately, to confirm his hypothesis that began to crystallize in his mind very slowly and steadily. The killer was using the fog as a deadly weapon for him, meaning that he monitors the weather report regularly and plans his crimes based on it systematically. This discovery changed the course of the investigation completely, as the focus shifted from searching for a simple personal motive to searching for a person who has deep knowledge of weather patterns and the complex movement of the city. Arthur realized that the enemy he was facing was very smart and organized, and left nothing to chance in his complex and well-considered criminal plans. This new information gave him new and strong hope, as it narrowed the circle of suspects very significantly, and made him focus on people who might have a reason to use the weather as a cover for their evil acts in the dark streets of London. On the following cold night, Arthur returned to the site of the last crime himself, determined to search for any small clue that the investigation team might have overlooked the first time due to haste. The ground was muddy and heavily frozen, and the foul smell of the river filled the nose and hurt the senses, making the search process very arduous and exhausting for him and his close assistants. He began examining every small stone and every dark corner near the place where the poor body was found, searching for anything strange that might have fallen from the killer's pocket unintentionally. After long hours of precise and continuous search under light rain, he found a very small piece of paper lying under a large rock, protected from rain and wetness thanks to its completely hidden location. Arthur took the paper with extreme care and great caution, and used a strong magnifying glass to examine what was written on it clearly, to find that it contained strange numbers and symbols that made no sense at first direct glance. He felt that this small paper was the real key he had been searching for a long time, and it might be the strong link that connects all previous crimes to each other finally. He returned to his office very quickly, carrying the new evidence with a hand trembling slightly from the intense freezing cold and extreme excitement, realizing that this small piece of paper could change the course of the investigation entirely and reveal the identity of the serial killer who had terrified the city for a very long time. After a very precise examination of the paper in his office under the dim electric lamplight, Arthur realized that it was part of a very old train schedule dating back to distant previous years. The railway lines mentioned in the schedule had been cancelled for a very long time, and the mentioned stations no longer existed on official current railway maps. Arthur wondered deeply about the reason the killer kept this neglected old schedule, and why he found it specifically in the location of the last crime specifically without others. He began linking the times mentioned in the old schedule and the times of the recorded crimes, finding a very amazing match between the arrival times of the old trains and the estimated hours of death of the victims. He realized here that the killer uses this schedule not to travel by trains actually, but as a precise time guide to organize his criminal operations with extremely terrifying accuracy. The schedule represented an internal clock for the killer, helping him to move between different districts at times when guards are less vigilant due to the thick fog. This discovery was a real shock for Arthur, as it revealed a very high level of prior planning and criminal intelligence on the part of the unknown suspect. Arthur now had a deeper and more comprehensive understanding of the killer's modus operandi, bringing him a very big step closer to catching him before he committed another crime in the cold nights of London. Arthur decided to dive deeper into the history of the old and abandoned railways, so he went to the National Archives to search for information about employees who worked in those officially cancelled lines. He discovered that there was a former worker who had been dismissed from his job unfairly and harshly 20 years ago, and he had a record full of repeated complaints against the responsible company management. Arthur began to strongly suspect that this person might be the wanted killer, especially since he has very precise knowledge of the old schedules and completely abandoned stations. Arthur gathered all available information about this mysterious person, including his last address and a very old picture of him, and began monitoring his movements from a distance without the man feeling that he was under the security microscope. Arthur was very keen not to arouse the suspicions of the dangerous suspect, as he knew that any simple mistake could lead to his escape and disappearance forever in the very vast labyrinth of London. The operation required very long patience and extreme precision in execution, as every move by the police had to be calculated very accurately. Arthur felt that he was about to finish the complex puzzle, but he also knew that the next stage was the most dangerous of all, as he would face the killer face to face in a battle of wits that might determine the fate of many innocent lives in the very near future. Based on the precise analysis of the old schedule, Arthur predicted that the next crime would occur near an abandoned train station located on the outskirts of the old and neglected city. He decided to set up a very tight ambush in that dangerous area, where he distributed his men in strategic positions covering all possible entrances and exits of the abandoned place. The night was extremely cold and freezing, and the fog was so thick that the men could not see their hands clearly in front of their frozen faces. Arthur and his men waited with very long patience, freezing in their fixed places, without making any sound that might alert the cunning suspect to their presence. The hours passed very slowly and boringly, and every minute seemed like a whole lifetime of waiting and intense anticipation for the expected and fateful event. Arthur was staring into the surrounding pitch darkness, trying to capture any strange movement or sound of light footsteps on the gravel scattered on the old ground. He knew that the killer might not appear tonight for sure, but his strong criminal intuition told him that this was the last chance to catch him before he completed his comprehensive criminal plan. Tension filled the surrounding atmosphere, and every man in the ambush realized the gravity of the task resting on his shoulders on that fateful night that might change the history of crime in London. Suddenly, Arthur heard the sound of very light footsteps approaching slowly from the area of the abandoned station. And the sound was regular, as if the person was walking according to a specific and determined rhythm. The shadow of a tall man appeared protruding through the very thick fog, wearing a long coat and a black hat that completely hid the features of his face from the lurking eyes. The man was not carrying any visible weapon in his hands, but he was moving with the confidence of someone who knows the place well and fears nothing that might face him there in the darkness. Arthur signaled to his men to stay in their places accurately until the man came closer, to ensure the impossibility of his escape at the critical last moment. The heart was beating very strongly in Arthur's chest, as he watched every move made by the suspect with extreme precision without blinking his eye once. The man stopped suddenly at a specific point in the old station, as if he was waiting for something or remembering a very painful memory that passed in this exact place many years ago. Arthur exploited this golden opportunity and issued the signal for immediate attack. So police officers came out of their hiding places surrounding the man from all sides, cutting off any way for escape or potential resistance in those critical moments of the precise security operation. The man did not resist the sudden arrest, but surrendered with very strange calmness, as if he was expecting this inevitable fate from the beginning and was not planning to escape from final justice. When Arthur approached him and revealed his face boldly, he confirmed his identity as the dismissed worker who had been suspected since the beginning of the last precise investigation. The man never denied the charge directed at him, but began to speak in a very calm voice about the great injustice he was subjected to and how the system did not give him his right when he was in dire need of it. His motive was not murder itself or love of blood, but revenge against the system that neglected him, and using crimes as a way to draw attention to his case forgotten for very long decades. Arthur listened to his painful confessions in complete silence, realizing the human tragedy behind these crimes. But he also realized that the law does not forgive regardless of personal motives or painful old grievances. The man's hands were tied tightly and he was led to the closed police car, while the fog began to dissipate very slowly, revealing the face of the moon that was hidden throughout the long night. The very long chase ended, and Arthur felt a great weight lifting off his tired shoulders. But he did not feel joy, but deep sadness over the circumstances that led a human being to this very dark and painful path. On the following sunny morning, major newspapers published the news of the arrest of the fog killer, and tranquility gradually returned to the streets of London that had suffered from terror for very long weeks. Arthur stood in front of his wide office window, watching people who began to go out to practice their normal lives without fear of the shadows that were haunting them in every corner and place. Despite his brilliant success in solving the complex case, Arthur realized that evil never ends in this world, and that it may appear again in different forms in the near or very distant future. He closed the red case file and put it in the secret archive, sighing with relief after long nights of fatigue and strenuous effort that he exerted to reach the absolute truth. The fog had disappeared completely from the sky, and the sun began to rise to illuminate the city with warm light after nights of pitch darkness and painful freezing cold. Arthur learned from this important case that behind every crime there is a very complex human story, and that the detective's role is not only to catch the criminal, but to understand the reasons that drove him to that act. He returned to his home to rest a little from fatigue, ready to face any new challenge that the big city of London might impose on him, which never sleeps and does not stop producing secrets and mysteries that need someone to reveal them to the light.